stay the course. At the end of the day, for us, we're championing science. We're championing the things that people can do to keep themselves and their loved ones well. And you can't get distracted by things that people may say otherwise. And we're making sure we customize the message to appeal to people. And we speak in that kind of language so that people feel empowered to make a decision that's right for them. And so I think all communicators do that, right? You're always looking to understand, what does the audience need to hear? What's going to trigger them? What's going to turn them off from your message? And you customize your message, but you have to keep that true north. You have to know where you're going, and you have to continue to put that information out there. And then what I have found is that while there will be people on the fringes, there will be outliers in either direction. You're going to reach the majority of people with the message that you need to, if you stay consistent to the facts and to what your message is.
Have you ever noticed that some of the best ideas come from unexpected places? Your next breakthrough may come from a leader facing similar challenges, but in a completely different sector. Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Shop. Join us as we explore how today's successful leaders inspire, influence, and connect with others. Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board, who have teamed up to spotlight how great leaders and communicators are making their impact in the world. This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. As a proud GW graduate myself, I can attest that faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. I am so thrilled to introduce today's guest, Silvia Taylor, the Executive Vice President and Chief Corporate Affairs and Advocacy Officer at Novavax, which is a global biotechnology company known for its proven vaccine technology. Before we dive in, here are three things that I think you should know about Silvia. Number one, she has deep expertise in developing marketing, communications, and branding campaigns in complex markets and new technologies, especially in healthcare. She's worked on some of the biopharmaceutical industry's biggest and most innovative brands that have focused on either pioneering new markets like sexual health or bringing to market disruptive technologies like insulin inhaled directly into the lungs, a flu vaccine sprayed up the nose, or a cancer-fighting drug candidate that harnesses the power of a patient's own immune system to overcome the cancer. Really cool stuff. Number two, in addition to getting products to consumers and professional customers, Silvia helps companies get financed and grow shareholder value. As an investor relations and corporate affairs officer, she's played leadership roles in raising over $730 million of capital through corporate financings, and she's even helped sell a company at a market value 5 times larger than it was when she started on its executive leadership team. Very popular with shareholders in that case, I'm sure. And number three, in her current role at Novavax, Silvia oversees a massive portfolio. It includes external and internal communications, government affairs, public policy, patient advocacy, corporate reputation, global corporate digital experience and engagement, and corporate responsibility. So there's a lot for us to dig into today. Silvia, you have called yourself a marketer at heart, and others have called you a Pharma Voice 100 inspiring leader, a Maryland Technology Council board member, an award-winning innovator, and a biopharmaceutical leader. Well, today we are thrilled to call you something else, a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to meet you and to be here, Anthony. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate you making time for us. And just to start, I know you've worked in the biopharmaceutical field for nearly 3 decades. Is it safe to say that COVID was like nothing the industry had ever seen before?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one of the things that I have been really proud of is the fact that Novavax was part of the response. The world had such a need when the COVID pandemic struck. And, we've had other pandemics in the past. This one was just particularly devastating globally. And so I think what it caused everybody to do, our industry, it touched everybody. I think it caused people to do things in so many different ways. And I think, for Novavax, we had been working in infectious disease vaccines for a while. We had a program in influenza that we were moving forward. And then we stopped and made a hard pivot into developing our COVID-19 vaccine because that's what the world needed. And, in just 2 years, we developed and we got authorization for this vaccine. The pace of change that we had to lead through, the amount that we had to communicate and influence to make sure people understood what we were doing, why we were doing it. We're developing a vaccine, it has very rigorous safety information. It's going into tens of thousands of people before it hits the market. All of those things were so absolutely critical. And not only Novavax, but our other peer companies, whether they were in vaccines or therapeutics, they found themselves doing things in a much more rapid way than they ever had done before. So it's really, really extraordinary. And I have to say, it was just fascinating to be part of that and feel like we were contributing and being part of the solution.
It must have been a wild ride because you started sort of in the middle
Yeah.
of that.
Yes.
And I want to ask, just for folks who don't know, I mean, what's interesting about the COVID-19 vaccines is that unlike when you go get your flu shot, people go, "Oh, I got my flu shot." When we all started getting vaccines, people would say, "Oh, did you get J&J or did you get Moderna or did you get Pfizer?" And there's differences between these different vaccines. So can you talk a little bit about that? But where does Novavax fit in? What makes Novavax vaccine different in the marketplace?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what you're referring to, Anthony, is this incredible thing I have not seen in other times in my career. And that is that the product name is the company name. And that gave tremendous opportunity, I think, to communicators and people who are in positions to influence the shape of the conversation around COVID-19. It gave us such an opportunity to grow the name recognition of our companies so that people would feel like, you know what, I know that company. I know Novavax. I can trust the product that's coming from that company. And so it really was absolutely extraordinary in terms of the need to build public trust in a company as well as build public trust in a vaccine. You also asked about Novavax's vaccine, and there were a few things that made us different. Unlike some of the other companies that you mentioned, Novavax is a relatively small company. Unless you were really deep into infectious disease vaccines, you might not know who Novavax was. And so what we had to do is make sure that people understood that the company has a legacy of leadership in vaccines, that what makes us different is that we're a protein-based vaccine, very different than some of the other options that people had. So not only did we need to make sure people knew who Novavax was, we needed them to understand what's a protein-based vaccine. Why is that different? Why might it make a difference? Why might that be the right choice for me? So really complex and interesting stuff. And I have to say, from the vantage point where I sit, leading all of the external and internal stakeholder communications, it was such an opportunity to really lean in and do what I do best, which is ensure that people understand who the company is, what our message is, and then are galvanized into action.
So you mentioned, like as an example, the difference between a protein-based vaccine. When I think of your role at Novavax, it's a pretty big job. We heard about the huge portfolio that you have, and I know you have to communicate with and influence stakeholders that range from, doctors and scientists on one end to patients and policymakers, those who have less technical expertise, us regular people. So how do you talk about, for example, a protein-based vaccine to different stakeholders, those who have a lot of expertise and you can use, certain language and vernacular with, and those who, they wouldn't understand what that means?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. People really vary in their journey in terms of how much they understand about science and even about COVID and COVID-19. That was really interesting. And I'll say that I'm not a scientist myself. And so when I think about communicating to different audiences, I start with, well, where are they in their journey of knowledge? And what are their needs? What are their fears? What do they need to hear from us? And so it's kind of having the humility to take a step back and say, I'm not going to assume that I think you need to know XYZ. I'm really going to kind of do my homework and understand where you're coming from and what's important to you. And so I think what that does is it enables us to take the same message, right? Like COVID-19 is a serious threat. There are vaccines available. You should get protected. It's the best thing that you can do to keep you and your loved ones safe. Customize that message based on whether it's a healthcare provider. You're going to be a lot more technical. You're going to talk about safety. You're going to talk about immunogenicity. When you're talking to a consumer, they don't really care. They just want to know, is COVID still a threat? Why should I still take a vaccine or encourage my loved ones to? And I don't know if that's such a great idea. And then you're talking to policymakers who say, oh gosh, this whole thing is just laden with so many issues and misinformation, and I don't even really want to deal with it. And so I think it's taking all of those perspectives into account and then customizing the message for what people need to hear to ultimately move them to do what we all want them to do, which is stay protected.
You mentioned one of the buzzwords we all in communications have, used and heard a lot, misinformation.
Yes.
I mean, everybody's dealing with that, no matter what organization they're with. But in your world, this must be a bigger issue than it is for many. I wonder if you could just talk about, as a communicator in your career, and of course now, how do you view misinformation? How do you address misinformation and disinformation? And what advice do you have for someone who might come into a role where this is a big part of their job?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a topic. I have so much to say on that, because I think, misinformation can really be a threat. And the way it can just take off and go viral is really something that people need to pay attention to. And so, for us, I think what's really been important is saying, look, there's a lot of misinformation out there. What we need to do, what we can best do, our best use as an innovative company who developed a vaccine and is making it available is spread the true, credible scientific information that people need to know, not just about COVID, not just about vaccines, but overall about what does all of this mean. And so it's really important to understand that some people you're just not going to be able to move, and so we customize our message of valid science and about what people need to understand about their healthcare and the choices that they make based on the science, and we just kind of let some of the misinformation hopefully go by the wayside in the face of really credible information that might say something different. And I think that's not just specific to COVID-19. I think you see that misinformation in a lot of different areas, and so I think what we focus on is just kind of staying the course, saying, look, we're going to stand for science, we're going to stand for the consumer perspective, and make sure we get that information out there, and then continue kind of to be consistent about that message.
I think it's such an important perspective because with so much, stuff out there, misinformation and rumors and all kinds of stuff, it can be really distracting. And,
Mhm.
it's very easy to want to go chase and correct all of those things. And sometimes that might actually even fan the flames. And so knowing sort of your true north and focusing on that, in your case, use it, the science and the credible information. Obviously you have to pay attention to what folks are saying out there, but if you spend all your time trying to react to that, it really can detract from your core focus. Is
Yeah,
that,
I think you're 100. You almost said better what I was trying to say, which I think is, like stay the course. At the end of the day, for us, we're championing science. We're championing the things that people can do to keep themselves and their loved ones well. And you can't get distracted by things that people may say otherwise, other than to, of course, we're taking note, and we're making sure we customize the message to appeal to people. So, for example, if there are certain buzzwords they don't like, in vaccines, I'll give you one: mandates. People don't want to be mandated. They don't want to be told what to do. So, what we do is we talk about the benefits of getting vaccinated, right? And, what's the science say? What's the potential for a vaccine? And we speak in that kind of language so that people feel empowered to make a decision that's right for them. And so I think all communicators do that, right? Whether it's vaccines, whether it's COVID, you're always looking to understand, what does the audience need to hear? What's going to trigger them? What's going to turn them off from your message? And you customize your message, but you have to keep at what you're calling, I love that term, that true north. You have to know where you're going, and you have to continue to put that information out there. And then what I have found is that while there will be people on the fringes, there will be outliers in either direction. You're going to reach the majority of people with the message that you need to, if you stay consistent to the facts and to what your message is. It's really about discipline.
Yeah, I like what you said, stay the course.
Mhm.
And I think that something you said that really resonated with me is about really customizing that
Mhm.
message because, you can have great science, but if people don't understand it, if it doesn't sink in, then, it's not going to necessarily do its job. And so you're talking about the importance of communicating about the science and as a way of doing that you have to customize that for those different audiences based on where they're starting out and based on their level of expertise.
I totally agree. I think that premise is behind the previous question you asked, which is how do you take all these disparate audiences with different levels of understanding scientifically? And again, we're talking science here, but this could apply to any communicator, right? You're always going to have audiences that have different levels of understanding of the subject matter. So you have to customize that message while staying true to what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah. I was with a group recently and somebody said, we're going back to basics, because folks have been so focused in our organization about, which channel should we be on and should we, add this new social media channel
Mhm.
that they kind of lost focus around what their core message was.
Yes.
And this person said, we have to go back to basics and make sure that we remember what that is and focus on it before we decide, are we going to go join this platform or that platform or create this type of content.
Yeah, and I find that, look, it's adult learning principles. People need to hear something several times before it really sticks. And I also think if you stay consistent with your message, not reactionary, but consistent, over time, people will believe you. The people that are movable will be moved to action. As you and I both know, you're going to find outliers on either side. And some of those people you're just not going to be able to win over. And you know what? We're trying to get the best information, most credible information out to the most people to get the most people to take action. And so if
Yeah,
we do that, that's a win.
absolutely. Well, let's take a step back.
Mhm.
You have a really fascinating career journey, and I wonder if you could just tell us a bit more about that and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, it's a great question. It really made me reflect on kind of how long I've been working, and
Time flies,
yeah,
doesn't it?
exactly, time flies. But I started my career in communications and media relations. And over, the past few decades, I've had some kind of twists and turns. And the thread of consistency has always been I've been in roles that require me to communicate information that at times is more complex than others. And having that skill set has been transferable to other opportunities that have come to me along the way, and have also been part of what has made me successful. So I spent a few years out of college doing media relations and comms. And I always knew I wanted to be a product manager. I wanted to go to business school. And I did that. And then I went into the pharmaceutical industry, and I went into product marketing. But what got me there was the fact that I knew how to tell a story and I knew how to message. And I was working in marketing, And it didn't matter whether I was thinking about selling a product, talking to a physician, talking to a payer. This ability to distill the message, the information we're trying to convey into, the salient top three things, and the ability to customize that message, as you and I were talking about before, was what made me successful. And so I worked at Pfizer, working on a brand called Viagra, and that was incredibly complex and drew upon the ability to communicate to a target audience to kind of get past some of their fears or misconceptions about erectile dysfunction, which was a new and kind of emerging disease state that people really didn't talk about before. And so I spent some time doing that, took on other roles in marketing. And then I was offered an opportunity to take on a senior role in a company, a smaller biotech company, doing communications and investor relations. And again, those skills transferred. I hadn't done investor relations before, but it was all about the discipline of knowing what the message is and selling these ideas to investors who might invest in your company. And so over time, those my responsibilities have grown to incorporate not just IR, but also other corporate affairs functions, government affairs, advocacy. And now I sit on the executive leadership team of Novavax, where I use all of these skills to communicate and to influence and take on the broader general management perspective of the company. So it's been really cool. It's also cool to see how things kind of go full circle, and the skills that you're building along the way end up being such a part of what make you successful.
I love that. I wonder, you talk about some of the skills you're building along the way that, you can tap into now. Storytelling, um, in many ways, we've probably stayed the same over the last 30 years, but a lot of things have changed too. We were talking, earlier about how when I started my career and we wanted to reach Capitol Hill, we'd print out booklets and hand deliver them. And if we wanted to reach the public, we just had to hope a journalist from a big publication would cover us. And now there are so many other ways to get your message directly in front of folks. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what's stayed the same when it comes to storytelling, but what's changed and how have you helped organizations adapt to that change?
Yeah, I think the methods have changed, but the principles remain the same. We need to be relevant. We need to capture people's attention, whether that's a reporter, whether it's in my case, a physician, a patient. That stays the same. You have to be relevant. The methods have changed, right?
Mhm.
Now, social media, that plays, I think, a huge role in how people consume information, for better or worse, right? Because there's some of that misinformation that you and I have been talking about. I remember my first job out of college, I was a media relations assistant. I remember being at a photocopier, literally taking photocopies of media clips and then putting them in a package and circulating that to our executive team, right? And so now, that's all done electronically. You don't have to wait 2 weeks for the media clips to come. But the principle is the same in terms of we as communicators need to understand, is our message resonating? And how can we make sure we get it to the audiences that need to hear it? And I think, before, maybe it was a newspaper article, and a lot of people read the news, they watched the news. Well, now you've got to target not just traditional news outlets, you have to target social media. There are websites, there are podcasts like the one you and I are doing now. So there's so much more opportunity, I think, to reach people. But that thread you and I were talking about of staying true to your message and staying consistent becomes even more important because there are so many different places that people can consume your message. And they're looking to see, are you being consistent? Are you being truthful with me? Did you said this in this article, and then I went online and I saw that, and then I was on social, and in many ways, the messengers that convey our information, it felt like before there was more control over that, right? And now people can retweet and they can cut and paste something and send it, in a matter of a few seconds. And so you have to be even more disciplined about your message and even more watchful about what is out there, because there are so many opportunities for the message to to be wrong, right, or
Yeah.
changed, and you really have to be up on that. It's interesting.
And I like that thread that you pulled in from what you said earlier about consistency, that staying the course is so important to building trust.
Yeah,
Consumers and all audiences, they notice if you're flip flopping and if
yeah,
you're not being consistent.
yeah,
And I like how you set up. The principles have stayed the same, but the methods have changed. And
yeah,
I think that's I've heard similar juxtapositions, but I actually like that vocabulary that you used, principles and methods. I
yeah.
think that that's a really good way for communicators to think about it.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll give you another example in the field of investor relations, right? This whole idea of, are you being consistent with your message? Often what some investors will do is they'll ask to speak to the head of IR, the CFO, the head of science, the CEO. And what they're looking for is everybody saying the same thing, right?
Mm,
Because not only are they trying as an investor to get the inside scoop to know whether something is a good investment or not, but they're also trying to determine if they can trust that management team. And often decisions about whether you do something, be it buy a stock, take a vaccine, buy a certain product, has to do with the amount that people trust you. So people are always watching and listening, right?
yeah.
And so that's why it's important to use the tools that we have at our disposal and to be consistent and make sure you're getting your message out there in a clear and consistent way.
Gosh, that makes me think the internal component of your communications role, not only is it so important, but more challenging today because, you could sit down and media train those top four people with talking points, but those investors, now they can go on social media or they can go on YouTube and see remarks that somebody gave and they can look at other things to see if people are being consistent. Are those LinkedIn posts consistent with what I'm hearing from the CFO and the head of investor relations? So it makes your job as a leader internally even more complicated to try to make sure everybody's on the same page, right?
I love that you made that connection. The importance of internal communication is huge. And we spend a lot of time, everything you and I are talking about is really about kind of the externalization of the message, right? All the people we need to meet, to reach rather externally. But internally, they are your employees are the messengers. And even though every company will have really strict guidelines in terms of who's authorized to speak on the record, who's authorized to speak to an investor, the reality is, as you said, Anthony, people are posting on social media, people are putting things on LinkedIn, and people are watching. We know, for example, members of the media will contact employees of ours that they see on LinkedIn, or investors will as well, trying to get some information. People are so much more visible now of, I'm a member of this group. I, work at this company. And so we spend a lot of time informing, educating, motivating our employees, in part because, the first question you asked me was, wasn't the pandemic kind of unlike anything people have seen? Our employees at Novavax and everybody involved in the response, which was so many people, not even just the vaccines industry or healthcare industry, people worked so hard, right? And they did it because they were focused on keeping people safe, trying to end the pandemic. Novavax is a very mission driven company. And what that means is people need to understand, what is the mission? What are you doing? Why should I believe in what I'm doing? Why should I work so hard? So, this internal piece, motivating people, empowering them with, I know what the organization is doing and I understand my role in it, is so important. But also, as conduits to the externalization of that message, the internal piece is so important.
Yeah. Hmm. I think it reminds us, what is a big challenge and it's kind of sometimes seems easy on the outside when you get it right, but really clarifying that mission and making sure that everybody understands it. And, to your point, you do have to customize that message a little bit for different people and different roles and different experiences about why that matters to them, but rally everybody around that same
Absolutely.
mission.
And I think that's applicable to any company that moves quickly. Tech companies where the pace of innovation is so high. I mean, there's so many examples, right? Not just even in healthcare. I'm trying to make what I talk about applicable, to
Yeah.
other industries because I think it is. I think when things move so quickly, people need to understand, well, what is changing? What is the pace of change? How are external events influencing what I do and my ability to do what I do internally at this company? And why am I here? Why do I work here? As you and I are talking about, people have access to tons of information. They
Yeah.
know other companies, they know other jobs, and people can find each other easily now through LinkedIn and other
Yeah.
vehicles. And so you really have to earn the trust.
Hmm.
And I think the motivation of your employees. And so that's such a big part of what my team and I work on, here at Novavax. But I've always put a premium on that internal piece. I think it's so important.
You mentioned several times, change. It's
Mhm.
obviously inevitable. Something that's really fascinating about your career is that you've helped bring to market really disruptive
Mhm.
technologies. We mentioned some of them earlier, like insulin inhaled directly into the lungs, a flu vaccine sprayed up the nose, cancer fighting drug candidate that harnesses the power of a patient's own immune system to overcome the cancer. And I wonder if you could talk about how do you go about introducing these products to the medical community and to the public when they are new and different, because as a rule we know people really don't like change deep down, and you've made kind of a specialty of yours is helping people to see change as a positive with those examples and others.
Yeah, it's such a great question because, as I reflect on some of the experiences you're talking about, it really was helping people understand, hey, there's a change, there's something new, and why should it matter for you? And people will say they like change, they're excited for innovation, but as you're saying, do they really? Do I really trust it? Do I understand it? And then when you talk about healthcare, well, new isn't always better. Has it been studied? Is there rigorous safety data? And so I think that you absolutely have to understand, as we talked about earlier, where your audience is coming from. What do they need to hear from you? And I'll give you an example. Let's talk about inhaled insulin or inhaled flu vaccine. You've got consumers who will say, well, I used to get my product through a shot, and now you want me to get it this way. Well, what does that mean for me? What do I have to change? A healthcare provider may say, "Gosh, I'm so busy. My practice has so many people in it. I can barely keep up, and now I have to manage this change when the old modality may have worked, right?" And it kind of goes on and on. And so you really have to be clear and consistent and compelling in articulating the need for change, articulating why is something going to make your life better or your practice easier, right? And you have to find, I think, innovative ways to grab people's attention. And when I worked on inhaled influenza vaccine, one of the things that we used was humor. And I think that's kind of a hallmark of my approach. I think you can get people's attention when you use humor. Sometimes it's a little bit disarming. And we created this campaign that said, "I pick my nose," and it was dedicated or geared rather to parents who needed to make the decision about what influenza vaccine their child should have. And so this play on words of like picking your nose, that's rude. I teach my kid not to do that. But instead, we actually used it to get people's attention and sort of demystify some of the different aspects of getting an influenza vaccine that way. So I think it's kind of making sure that you start with what people need to hear from you, and then you get their attention in an eye catching way.
Absolutely. I love that one. Yeah, using humor, just something surprising, can really connect with people. When we think about, connecting with just audiences with different backgrounds, I know you were born in Argentina,
Mhm.
you're fluent in Spanish, and I wonder if you could talk about how that global perspective has helped you as a marketer and an influencer.
Yeah. Thanks for that question. I think, global perspectives, different perspectives, there's a buzzword, people talk about that a lot. For me, it's so deeply personal. Being a person who was born in another country, being a Latina, being a woman in business, right? I am absolutely so aware of the need for, I think, diverse voices to be heard. And it's really made me be a champion for those diverse voices. And I don't just mean, people who may look different than other people. I'm talking about people who have different experiences. In what I do, I mentioned earlier, I work in science. I'm not a scientist. I need to bring in the perspectives of people who know things that I don't, have expertise that I don't, to make sure that something happens and that results are driven. And I think that's because I have such an understanding and appreciation for multiple perspectives. I also think it impacts the way I lead. I have such a strong desire, I think, to ensure the representation of some of these, diverse voices, that it really impacts the way I lead, the leadership teams I form, and I just think it's really vital.
When it comes to misinformation and healthcare, I think it really showcases the importance of those diverse voices because, we have to reach everyone. And that means we have to have that cultural competency to be able to understand someone who was born in another country or may speak another language as their first language. And so it's really, particularly relevant to the issues we're talking about today when it comes to healthcare and vaccines and
Absolutely.
misinformation.
And I think it's customizing the message. One thing that was really
Yep.
interesting for Novavax is, the first year that we got authorized and approved, for our COVID vaccine, we did so in 42 different countries. And
Wow.
so taking the perspective of all of the different places our product was going to go. And, not only did people speak different languages, the healthcare systems were different. The way the
Mm.
governments treated COVID was very different, right? And so this ability to, I think, take that perspective, have that worldview, I draw upon it in everything I do, but I think it's really, really important, as I think you're alluding to, we know that certain diseases are disproportionately affecting certain parts of the population. And so you really have to have the ability to understand where some of those different groups are coming from to be able to make sure you're giving them the information they need to take action.
Well, one of the things that I want to touch on that you mentioned is you talked about, the next generation. And I know mentorship is something that's really important to you. I think it's one of the most important forms of influence because it's how we teach the next generation to be successful and impart what we've learned. So I wonder if you could talk about your own approach to mentorship and, maybe how some of your own mentors have inspired you as you show up as a mentor to others.
Yeah, I think mentorship is so important. I completely agree with you on that. I think I have learned so much in my career from other people, not just from the work I've done, but watching people. Mentorship can take both a formal form, you are my mentor, will you work with me? But you can get so much mentorship and coaching from everybody you observe. And so I've spent my career observing people in different functions, in functions that I aspire to be in executive leadership roles, as I also aspire to be in. And I believe that mentorship has been invaluable to me. I also believe that given what you and I talked about earlier, being a woman in business, being a Latina, it's really important to me that diverse voices get represented in the senior ranks of a company. And I agree with you that one of the best ways to make sure that we bring the next generation along is through mentorship. So I have people that I mentor. I have a woman at Novavax who I work very closely with, and actually, to prepare for this podcast, I actually asked her, what do you think of the approach, that you and I are taking to mentorship? Why is it important to you? And she said that one of the things that she's appreciated is we're working on her career development goals. We're creating a path for her to advance her career. But then what we're doing is where there are specific skills or gaps or areas of interest that she's identifying, we work on those. We build a plan for those. And I think that what that does is it helps her build her own influence, and it helps me build mine because I'm touching a part of the organization that I don't necessarily work in. People see that, oh, she walks the walk, right? Walks the talk. She says mentorship is important and development, but she's actually doing that. And I think that helps you grow your influence and your credibility internally. So I think it's incredibly important. And I think it's one of the joys of being at this point in my career that I think I actually have some information and wisdom to impart. And I really spend a lot of time working on that and giving my time to others, people who work for me formally, as well as people I can mentor.
I love that. And I always think mentorship these days is probably more two-way than ever because if, in communications, we have to stay on top of all the new technologies and it's usually the 20 something that's teaching me about the latest craze that I need to be
Oh,
aware
you're
of.
so
So,
right. You're so right. Or our kids, which is a
yeah,
whole nother, a whole
God,
nother thing.
As we wrap up, I just want to ask you, you've been part of so many innovations in healthcare in your career, Sylvia. What excites you when you think about the future of your industry?
So my industry being healthcare, and the experience that I've been involved in has been one that the whole world was involved in, which was the pandemic. I am really excited about the role that my industry can play in preparing us for what's to come next. And I think what COVID-19 did for people is really say, wow, are we prepared? Were we prepared? What could we have done better? How could we have minimized the devastating impact of the pandemic? And so what I think it did is enhance the importance of being prepared and also of partnerships and collaborations, right? So no one company can do it alone. In fact, our business strategy at Novavax is evolving to even more of taking our innovative R&D and partnering it out to other companies that can extend and magnify the impact of our technology more than we could even do it on our own. I see that trend toward more collaboration, more partnership, being ready, and I'm so excited about that. Currently we see avian influenza that is rearing its head. We don't know where that's going to go. Our company is working to be prepared for that too, should that be needed. So I think this ability to use all the technology to be tracking what's going on and then to have a commitment to get ahead of it, I think is really, really exciting. And one of the things I love about being in this industry.
Well, you are certainly on the leading edge. It has to be exciting and probably a little bit exhausting at times. I just thought this was such a great conversation today, Sylvia, because we touched on so many topics, but a big theme that really came out for me is, look, we live in a time of change, and we as communicators have to help people both internally and externally adapt to that change and accept that change and find ways to, move along in the world with that change, but consistency of our message, staying the course. And yes, customizing that message for different audiences, but really we can't build trust if we are not consistent about our communication. And that is so critical to influence. And it's definitely a thread that we can see across all of the innovations and experiences in your entire career. So I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your story. And congratulations on your success and your recognition as a chief influencer.
Thank you. It's been my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Chief Influencer, a production of Social Driver and the Communications Board. If you know a leader who should be featured as a chief influencer, please nominate them at chiefinfluencer.org. For show notes and more, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn. Until next time.